is the greatest gladiator match and comic book movie in the history of the world. Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition, shorthanded as BVS, is the defining epic of the modern day. It is an honor and a pleasure to be alive to have experienced this monumental film that so heavily mirrors the societal landscapes of the contemporary world. The layers of this film run so deep that it is impossible to unravel them in one essay. The Brilliance of BVS, as you know, will be an ongoing series that will explore the vastness of the Ultimate Edition's connections with mythology, religion, politics, and history. Traditions from American national security cinema and pertinent social issues coalesce into a grand symphony of action that masterfully captures the struggle of the world as it is today. It is no secret that director Zack Snyder is a fan of Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, which DC fans undoubtedly consider to be one of the greatest stories ever told. How Zack Snyder, Chris Terrio, Larry Fong, and their team were able to bring this story, along with other comic and film inspirations, together in such a profound and opulent manner is still a wonder. In an attempt to plunge into the depth of this film, this essay will explore how BVS is the defining contemporary epic because of how the three most powerful entities in the world, Batman, Superman, and America, experienced modernization from 1986 to the prolific present-day setting of 2016. America has seen great change in those 30 years, but the nation's secular messiah, an urban jungle myth, continued to stand the test of time despite the attrition of the legitimacy of America's institutions and her demythologization. When discussing how myth continues to impact us in the modern world, Joseph Campbell explains the true significance behind court judges and the role of president. He explains that when a judge walks into the room and everybody stands up, you're not standing up to that guy. You're standing up to the robe that he's wearing and the role that he is going to play. The accoutrement symbolizes that the power invested in this role is worthy of that respect, much like a cape does. It enables him to serve the people. Campbell then explains that only a small number of kings throughout history actually shared the noble qualities of the role that they served. However, they were still granted their respects because of the role's status. Campbell continues to explain that when someone becomes president of the United States, that man is no longer that man. He's the representative of an eternal office. As judges continue to cave to corruption, and as presidents continue to take us to war under false pretenses, bomb hospitals, and prove their incompetence through acts of tyranny, the legitimacy of the office rapidly erodes and the demythologization accelerates. This is due to myth having to be created and maintained through tradition, as we discussed in the Modern Saviors Prolegomenon.
We'll explore how our modern heroes fill the roles of heroes past, how our stories are reenactments of stories past.
As fictional ahistorical figures, Batman and Superman are immune to illegitimacy because they do not represent an eternal office. Rather, they are members of an eternal archetype. In the case of the judge, king, and president, and especially in the case of Batman and Superman, you are not responding to them as personality. You are responding to them in their mythological roles. When we engage with Batman, Superman, and the rest of the American pantheon, they are most impactful to society when we respond to them in this way. This is made obvious by the iconic nature of Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns and Zack Snyder's Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition. The strongman secular savior and the scourge of the underworld help us answer questions of the modern day and carve a path towards the future. Their only challenge being to evolve alongside the ever-changing discourse of the American consensus. It It would be difficult to find a person who understands the mythological significance of these two titans better than the author of Supergods, the DC epic Final Crisis, and an abundance of other comic book classics. Grant Morrison describes the nature of Snyder's modernization of Miller's comic book best in an interview on the main stage at the 2015 Comic-Kazi Expo, saying,
The movie's like The Dark Knight, but it's an inversion of Dark Knight. In Frank Miller's Dark Knight, Superman is very obviously working for the government. He's a Republican, he hangs out with Ronald Reagan, and he's up against a very libertarian outlaw Batman. In the new movie, it's actually changed around, where Superman's like the outlaw and Batman's working on the side of basically normality to bring this man down. And I think that's a really interesting change in a generation. That in the new movie, Superman isn't representing America, he's in chains representing this kind of outlaw immigrant who's a threat to our planet. And I think that's a massive change in Superman that will change the way people look at the character.
Things are different now, Bruce. The government, the public, they don't stand for you anymore.
If Superman were here right now, what would you want to say to him?
That my family too had dreams. To look him in his eye and ask him how he decides which lives count and which ones do not.
Morrison encapsulates the shifts in character based on the state of America at the given time with this stroke of genius. As this essay progresses, it will greatly expand on Morrison's statement with support from the tropes of American national security cinema, specific examples from the aforementioned comic, and a deeper analysis of BVS. As always, Larry ties Superman, the high-flying history of America's most enduring hero, and Ian Gordon's Superman, the persistence of an American icon, will provide the essay with necessary background knowledge. Batman's militaristic mindset, Superman's symbolism, and America's fearsome power will be supported by Hollywood, the Pentagon, and Washington, by Jean-Michel Valentin, and also by the 1% Doctrine, deep inside America's pursuit of its enemies since 9/11, by Ron Suskind. This will show how Batman mobilizes when serving as an allegory for a threatened America, how Superman represents a dualistic paradox, and the way America teeters on the scales of tyranny. The knowledge gathered from these and other various sources will also help demonstrate how the title of Outlaw transferred from one hero to the other. BVS is not what you would consider a film that would traditionally be found under the umbrella of national security cinema. While it does not reflect war movies directly, it does carry on the overarching themes and show how the American military has adapted to fight the war of the new age. The brilliance of BVS is in large part due to the implementation of traditions from American national security cinema into Batman's mindset, the power of the Superman in the modern day, and the awareness of America's decadence. As the three most powerful entities, they must be wary of how they use their power to avoid public disapproval, an act that has become nearly impossible in our ever-complicating world. Do those with power use it to protect the people, or do they use it to impose on the people? Is their use of power defensive or preventative?
Демократия должна научиться защищать себя.
Tonight, I am going to maintain order in Gotham City.
Угроза ядерной войны больше не должна использоваться как инструмент внешней политики.
I am here to appeal to your community spirit.
The defense policy of the United States is based on a simple premise. The United States does not start fights. We will never be an aggressor.
Either shut it down, or one of these days, someone with authority is going to tell me to come stop you.
The title of Outlaw is granted by the court of public opinion, More specifically, the outlaws whose ever use of power the public disagrees with. In the infamous 80s, the one-man nuclear deterrent and his power to protect America flattered the public, and he was seen as a hero for it, despite his own power being an even greater threat. Meanwhile, the one-man judge, jury, and executioner who was picking criminals and degenerates off the streets was painted as an authoritarian vigilante. This reality is not without reason. Since the days of FDR's presidency, the American national security complex and Hollywood have worked in a harmonious tandem for most of the following decades. In Valentin's book, he states that in 1942, President Roosevelt had summoned the most eminent Hollywood producers and directors to the White House in order to unhesitatingly assign them their role in the national call to arms. Since Hollywood and cinema have played a significant part in the presentation of national security ideals since at least 1942, and considering how Superman inspired American soldiers and civilians, contributing to the war effort greatly, it is safe to assume the comics have also upheld the ideals of national security for most of the duration of their existence as well. This assumption is confirmed when Gordon tells us that America's entry into World War II resulted in Superman lending his vast popularity to the war effort, and that DC and Superman lent their help selling war bonds. Since the early 20th century, cinema and superheroes have always displayed a shared attitude with America towards the threats they face. Valentin also explains that this allows the defense forces to be linked to the great myths. When the two greatest figures of American mythology perform a fantasy of the response to the threats that America faces, be it the challenges of World War II, the omnipresent threat of nuclear weapons, and the elusiveness of the modern terrorist organization, the traditions of American military cinema become embedded in their stories.
They can do this and you laugh.
On July 16, 1945, the United States tested the first atomic bomb, called Trinity.
They can split the very fabric of reality, blast 100,000 tons of sand into the sky, blotting out the source of all my power. I am slow and dying. I need only to reach the sun.
Our defense establishment must be evaluated to see what is necessary to protect against any or all of the potential threats.
It's 1986, the year The Dark Knight Returns is released by DC Comics. Ronald Reagan is president. Chills of the Cold War linger in the sky. An era defined by the arms race and the rest of the world's attempt to match America's nuclear capabilities. President Reagan displayed an unwavering faith in the face of the growing threat of nuclear weapons. According to Valentin, he considered them to be instruments of the devil, while his fictional counterpart refers to Superman as the next best thing to God, which not only deifies Superman, but also metaphorizes America's defensive power. The rest of the national security apparatus uses a more particular terminology by describing America's own possession of this power as nuclear deterrence, meaning that America's ability to use a nuclear weapon would deter any foreign nations from attacking the global superpower. This language is used to justify this power for ourselves, portraying it as a good, defensive use of power, which is exactly what determines the kind of power that the public will approve of. Power that is used in a defensive manner. Nuclear war becomes a reality after an ongoing conflict in Corto Maltese involving the Soviet Union. President Reagan is depicted giving an emergency broadcast on. He tells the American public that the Soviets have removed their troops and launched a nuclear warhead at the island inhabited by 20 million people. Superman immediately blasts into the sky to intercept the missile. Thankfully, Superman is able to redirect it and avoid an apocalyptic decimation. Since the American hero is able to match the power of a nuclear blast to save lives, he is portrayed as America's capacity for defense, forming the image that we are the defensive hero of the arms race. America's possession of this power is generally accepted by the public, even if it's just as a means of leveling the global playing field to the the point of a stalemate. In this depiction of national security ideals, Superman and his deeds serve as an accepted display of power, made just by being defensive. Soon after the detonation of the weapon, Batman, who is initially unaware, notices the lightless Gotham City, the lack of backup generator power, and the halting of the hands on a watch. Batman concludes that a nuclear explosion has brought about the beginnings of a very dark night. Batman goes on to say that Russia has taken the lead in the arms race. The line further works to justify America's possession of a vast nuclear arsenal, the same power it is trying to prevent. The aggrandization of the enemy allows for further justification and public support of the defensive measures. The messages within this myth worked in tandem with the real-life rhetoric of Reagan. The representative of the Eternal Office made it a point to paint America as heroic and altruistic, which is why Grant Morrison thought to mention that Miller portrayed Superman as a Republican figure. Superman fictionally embodied Reagan's messianic rhetoric of invulnerable defense, which was cherished by the public.
We are criminals, Clark. We always have been. You're still one too. The difference is you're a boss.
The United States does not start fights. We will never be an aggressor.
I believe you. I feel it now on you. What the rest of us live with every day. Your own mortality.
As Superman hangs on to life, nuclear winter befell Gotham. Civilization besieged. Light exclusive to the fire. The city plunged into chaos. Worse than usual, that is. Ordinary citizens abandoned the restraint of violence, and buildings burned as looters grabbed what they could. Gotham needed a man to take charge and restore order, by force if necessary. The Batman seized authority through the threat of greater violence and by restoring a communal spirit.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I am here to appeal to your community spirit. I know you've had your differences in the past. Some of you will even argue that you can't work together. That's fine. Those people will stay tied up.
One night during the weeks prior to the detonation and Batman's re-emergence from retirement, Jim Gordon sips whiskey with Bruce Wayne and discusses his own retirement and the future of Gotham. In a line unique to the animated film version of The Dark Knight Returns, Gordon tells a retired Batman that
things are different now, Bruce. The government, the public, they wouldn't stand for you anymore.
Batman is the outlaw because his public displays of aggression and his masculine authority, going above the law to drag criminals off the streets, is seen as a preventative use of power, not defensive. Addressing the country from the Oval Office in 1983, President Reagan briefed Americans on the upgrades to America's military. He reassures that
the defense policy of the United States is based on a simple premise. The United States does not start fights. We will never be an aggressor. We maintain our strength in order to deter and defend against aggression, to preserve freedom and peace.
this real-life declaration provides insight as to why the public of Batman's timeless state does not approve of his methods. His methods are not aligned with America's then current attitude towards threat. The country was united against a clearly defined outside threat, a powerful Soviet Union that we needed to defend ourselves from. Taking the war inward and onto the streets of American cities misaligned Batman's mission with America's current fight. Therefore, the public in his world saw him as an aggressor, starting fights that resulted in a form of friendly fire from the perspective of a national identity. Throughout the panels of The Dark Knight Returns, the media coverage of Batman's actions shows the public's raging disapproval of Batman's preventative aggression. A character by the name of Mori, while being interviewed on a talk show, declares that if you toss in the victims of his fan club, the Batman-related body count is up there with a minor war. He then questions, who gave this thug the right to declare martial law? Last I heard, that takes an act of Congress. Mori, representing most of the public's opinion, is furious that Batman is waging this self-righteous war on the streets without any true need to defend ourselves from what he's fighting. While America was focused on the potential of a nuclear holocaust, crime was not a primary concern, which makes a man going above Congress to enforce his own law would be reprehensibly radical when America needed to unite against an external threat. It was not until after the bomb, when crime was liberated from any restraints or opposition in a debilitated Gotham, did Batman's aggressive implementation of violence become a necessary defensive use of power. The approaching clopping of his black horse signaled the return of a force that opposed lawlessness.
Tonight, we are the law. Tonight, I am the law.
And restored the underpinning threat of violence that keeps society peaceful, in order, and defends against chaos. Following the dissolution of the USSR in 1991, America has sat atop the world as the only superpower. Capable of deterring any threat, America has enjoyed the sole responsibility in keeping the peace. However, without the Soviets, America no longer had an equivalent counterbalance to the national security system, which condemns its own inherent tyrannical potential. Without a strong, fearsome villain to defend us from, there is no reason for Superman to possess his power. Or, without rampant crime, Batman would not be a protector. Without an enemy, the American national security complex began to think that power is useless if left unused.
This shot showing you lower Manhattan, and everything is actually in pretty good shape now.
This nation stands with the good people of New York City.
Even worse came after. The government attacked. No mercy in the villages. My parents tried to run.
Tell me.
The fact that there was no blood in the images of 11 September clearly signify, if the nation is not bleeding, it is neither wounded nor mortal.
So long as Superman was yet to bleed, neither was he.
The most notable change in cinema following 9/11 was that Hollywood no longer needed the military for dramatic material. Now unable to placate the realities of war in a believable fashion, the military depended more on Hollywood than Hollywood did on them. National security now needed cinema to continue to set up a fictional barrier between the public and its fears. Valentin tells us that the 11 September attacks broke down this barrier by forcing the test of reality onto the imaginary world. Valentin also tells us that proper portrayals of September 11th are exceptionally rare in cinema. BVS brilliantly brings the imaginary world into reality by having the Son of Sun and Knight of Night face our own fears outside of the fictional barrier of innocent power and unsullied hands.
There are plenty of people, sir, who would say he's their hero.
He is not a hero.
He has the power to wipe out the entire human race. Bruce, please. I was wrong. You have to listen to me.
We can go straight to Key Red, Mr. President.
God have mercy on us all. Oh, God.
The incapability of bleeding under normal circumstances gave Superman a fearsome level of power that the world had to come to understand. For decades prior, national security has veiled reality by presenting American conflicts in a semi-fictitious manner to allow the public to partially digest the complex conflicts. The unholy attacks on American soil broke down this barrier by forcing the test of reality onto this imaginary world. After the entire country witnessed the terror of 9/11, how could American cinema ever again placate the realities of war in a believable manner? BVS offers a reflection to this dynamic Valentin describes, as if it tests the imaginary world onto reality. America's two grandest myths are brought into the harsh, grounded reality of the modern world. It is a realistic depiction of the crimes they face in the present day, from corrupt prisons to human trafficking and mass murder. Superman is ensnared in complex military operations, witnesses unstoppable bombings, and the injustices of a powerful, prevention-oriented America. Batman is releasing the grip on his founding principles in an aggressive and desperate struggle for power. BVS defines the contemporary era by continuing the traditions of American national security cinema in an age where traditional values no longer guide us, and where there is too great of power for war to be just. As we discussed in Understanding Superman 2 and 3, Superman is a personification of America's messianic identity. From the perspective of European settlers, such as Jerry Siegel's ancestors, America offered a safe haven of new opportunity for anyone brave enough to make the journey, and combined with its might, it was idealized to offer peace on Earth. By the mid-20th century, America's particular status among nations should make it unthinkable to even imagine attacking them, unless they were an ally of evil. This one line from Valentin's book gives us insight into the mental state of Batman and Superman following General Zod's devastation in the Black Zero event. To understand what their mentalities in this film are demonstrating, it is important to understand what they represent. Superman, as always, represents a duad of forces as the potential threat to America and America's own power, trying to show us what we should do with it. The first foreign attack on American soil shattered the country's messianic identity. It was no longer a safe haven, free from worry of invasion. Since the Black Zero event parallels 9/11 in such a profound manner, it serves as this timeless Earth's first attack from beyond. This association also damages Superman's personification of America's flawless protectorship due to his involvement in the devastation, regardless of his heroism in stopping it. Superman is seen as a threat to America simply for possessing that same power. Valentin explains how some aspects of the military's reality do not translate as well to the public through Hollywood. He explains that its potential for violence and massacre is not ethically acceptable for American society. which is the same issue the world has with Superman throughout BVS. His potential for violence and massacre is too great to be left unchecked, and that is not acceptable for American society. This is made clear by the chanting of "Burn him! Burn him! Burn him!" in the streets of Metropolis. As far as anyone in Metropolis knows, besides Superman, a second attack could be coming at any moment.
Jesus, Alfred, count the dead. Thousands of people. What's next? Billions?
As we discussed in the first Understanding Superman, the character once again exists as conflicting identities simultaneously. Following the real and fictional catastrophes, Superman took form in representing both a power that was harmful and intolerable to Americans, while also representing the equivalent power that America possesses. However, as the power behind the threat of terrorism dwindled in the decades following 9/11, so did America's defensive justification for possessing its power. The effort to fight terrorism caused the national security apparatus to become increasingly preventative and tyrannical. The widespread disapproval of Superman we see in the film is a result of his representation of America potentially possessing too much power and the tyranny that would certainly follow. After September 11th, America's new enemy was both elusive and ubiquitous. Superman shares these two specific qualities. He shares the qualities of something capable of hurting America. He is impossible to catch, but he's everywhere. Yet another paradox he exists as. However, he also possesses the same limitless firepower and capacity for destruction as the American national security complex. This is how he is able to represent another opposing duality. The loosely defined terrorist offered an omnipresent threat in America because a terrorist could be anyone, anywhere, planning to outdo themselves. After the Black Zero event, the film's America now had an omnipresent threat with
an alien who, if he wanted to, could burn the whole place down. There wouldn't be a damn thing we could do to stop it.
The Black Zero event displayed the power the Superman is capable of. Over the course of a couple hours, General Zod and his world engine destroyed a portion of Metropolis equivalent to that of a small city park. Zod personally destroying Wayne Tower showed the world how much power just one being like Superman possesses. The fear of a second attack accompanies the introduction of an omnipresent threat. A terrorist could be anywhere, and in the film, the man who can single-handedly topple cities can be anywhere. The powerlessness and terror that the American people felt on the morning of September 11th is brilliantly performed by the film to set a stage for a modern America. On October 7th, 2001, addressing the nation from the White House Treaty Room, President Bush declared the war on terror by announcing plans to combat Al-Qaeda. The attacks on September 11th motivated the American national security complex to amass even more power than it already had. In the years prior to 2001, there had been great debate over arming the unmanned Predator drone, just like the one we see in the film. Following the devastation, the hesitations about the arming of Predators that characterized the years prior to 9/11 were now just a memory. The US military now had a way to strike someone down from the skies, while the man pointing the gun is invulnerable due to his absence. This ability that the American national security complex now possesses equates to how Superman could potentially use his powers of heat vision and invulnerability against whoever is beneath him or misaligned with his interests. Superman's ears capture nearly every word spoken, while his vision renders nearly everything transparent. The existence of Superman's nearly omnipotent senses would introduce the threat of mass surveillance to the people, on top of unpredictable destruction. Nothing would be secret from him, nowhere would be safe from him, and nothing could be kept private from him. In Batman Volume 7, Endgame by Scott Snyder, Batman is also fighting Superman, a poisoned, jokerized version of him. Batman tells us through his internal monologue that Superman has limits, lines he never crossed. This thing the toxin has turned him into. If he wants to kill you, there's likely nothing on Earth that can stop it. Of course, Superman in BVS and in most comics imposes limits onto himself so that he does not bring harm to the world around him or impose on people's freedoms, like that of privacy. The CIA and the rest of the national security complex recognize no such limits and obey no boundaries. America needed justification to amass the power it dreamed of, and with 9/11, it had it. In 1978, the Federal Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, was passed to protect the American people from an infringement of freedom by requiring a strict process in which America's intelligence organizations must appeal in order to be allowed to spy on an American citizen. Beginning in 2002, this legal process was completely disregarded by the CIA and the FBI, as they obscured the definition of what qualifies as evidence and began to build a machine to survey the world and investigate everyone, as Grant Morrison referenced. The company's First Data and Western Union volunteered their assistance in the fight against the perpetrators of 9/11 so that the CIA could establish a network in their massive processing centers. They now possess the power to track financial transactions, phone calls, and emails all over the world. Susskind tells us that this was only one part of the worldwide matrix. On October 26th of 2001, President Bush passed the Beguiling Patriot Act, which allowed for vast expansion of surveillance within the United States, including the searching of financial and personal records, the cooperation of the CIA with the other intelligence agencies and international corporations, and the overstepping of the executive branch combined to create a power equivalent to Superman's supremely superior senses. Nothing can be kept secret from them. They deny any freedom of privacy, and they consider evidence to be arbitrary. Nowhere is safe from them, and nothing is private to them. As the years after 2001 progressed, despite the efforts of the government and lies about WMDs, the counterbalance of terrorism to America's might dwindled, and America retained their massive power. Ever since, this power has been used in a tyrannical fashion to spy on American citizens and begin the deterioration of our freedoms. This is how Superman becomes the outlaw in the modern day, simply because he possesses the ability to do the same. As Morrison said, there is no counterbalance to the monoculture. He specifically stated that everyone's under surveillance and everything's under control. They know what we're doing and they're watching our emails. Both Superman and the American National Security Complex have the power to strike you down from the skies with minimal effort. They both have the power to hear every conversation around the world. Their reach is too great to keep anything away from them. Initially, the Superman is feared because of his potential for tyranny. The hysteria and degradation of American society in the last 23 years is partially due to the fear of the great and mighty power that America wields, and the government's recklessness and dishonor when swinging the sword. This all demonstrates the oldest lie in America, that power can be innocent, regardless of Superman disproving this for himself throughout the film. It is the oldest lie in America because it was derived from its principal foundings. In a response to the terrorist threat, America's national security became elusive, ubiquitous, and unstoppable, thus creating the general horror of tyranny, which is the mortal sin of American political culture, as Valentin explains. Undoubtedly, power is sieged, power is amassed, and it is impossible to have power without taking power from others. Power cannot be innocent. For the government to gain power, people have to lose freedoms. Therefore, people fear the fact that Superman is capable of the same tyranny that the CIA and the American government committed after the 9/11 attacks. That is what makes Superman the outlaw in the modern day. the fear of his potential tyranny. The world today is powerful enough for there to be infinite possibilities as to what we can do. That often the excessive choices is what we find ourselves so caught up in. The fictional Senator Finch states that
the world has been so caught up with what Superman can do that no one has asked what he should do. Let the record show that this committee holds him responsible.
He'll never answer to you. He answers to no one. Not even, I think, to God.
Desperate for intelligence following the attacks, the CIA thought about all it could possibly do, while rarely ever considering what it should do. In response to 9/11, the freedoms taken by the American national security apparatus resulted in tyranny and unchecked violence. Superman wields that same power, yet he never resorts to such sins because his duty and mythological role is to show us what we should do with our own power. Throughout the film, despite all the hatred thrown his way, Superman continually does the heroic defensive thing with his power. He shows up to Capitol Hill to defend his name and discuss solutions. Besides some intimidation, he hardly uses a fraction of his power to defend himself against Batman's attacks. And then the film culminates by Superman showing the most altruistic display of his power. A well-defined threat has presented itself with the coming of Doomsday. So, in order to defend mankind and offer salvation from the terror, Superman lays down his life to protect the world he loves. Before his sacrifice, no one knows how he will use his power or if a second attack is coming. Before dying to save the world, the looming threat of Superman's power existing freely was too great not to elicit a response.
Away. Just away. Clark Kent, Daily Planet.
What's your position on the Bat Vigilante in Gotham?
One man decides who lives. How is that justice?
There's a new kind of mean in him. He is angry. And he's hunting.
Mark, man, you know what to do to people with dishonor?
Don't listen to that nonsense. Only people scared of him. People who got reason to be.
Believe me, I'll do it!
Civil liberties are being trampled on in your city. Good people living in fear.
Don't believe everything you hear, son.
I've seen it, Mr. Wayne. He thinks he's above the law.
A shocked, enraged, and fearful Batman represents America's response to the terror of September 11th. As the buildings around him dilapidated into rubble, Bruce Wayne was first shrouded by the fog of war. He finally faced a power much greater than himself. Drastically unprepared and underpowered, Bruce began to let Batman's founding principles slip in an effort for survival. Batman, known for being paranoid, now lived in a state of panic due to the elusive and ubiquitous threat the Superman's ability to be anywhere creates. Valentin, referencing the film Courage Under Fire, and Prussian strategic theorist Karl von Clausewitz explains that the significance of showing the Iraqi soldiers as shadows shows that trauma comes from interacting with the enemy, which creates this moment of confusion, the fog of war, and which leaves the American soldiers with a
feeling of powerlessness.
Not unlike a state of shock. As Zod's attack progresses in Metropolis, Bruce is on the ground with first responders and citizens rescuing people in need. The experience of shared trauma endows Bruce with the perspective and desires of the public, which he brings to the Batman. Batman begins to act in a defensive manner, as any citizen would do. The Superman made Batman feel just as powerless as the common man is powerless to either of them. In the spiritual malaise and destitute aftermath of 9/11, America lacked the most valuable asset of all, intelligence. America's leadership and defense forces did not know how to respond. And initially, Batman was clueless as to how to fight a being as powerful as Superman. And like a hungry animal, starved of intelligence, Batman had less patience and became more brutal. After a soldier lingers too long in the fog of war, fighting a battle he doesn't know he can win, brutalization, a gradual transformation of the soldier's system of values so that they adapt to the fragility of their life and that of their adversaries, forces them to adopt the behavior of deadly violence, which becomes the norm, as Valentin explains. This is how a soldier adjusts to killing his enemies in battle. When only one man walks away with his life, you have to be that man, no matter what. Alfred tried to warn Bruce that
That's how it starts. The fever, the rage, the feeling of powerlessness. It turns good men cruel.
fear of a second attack developed a cruel and unforgiving, we find them and we kill them mentality within the CIA and in Batman, regardless of the cost. Now that this war between two titans has been declared, Batman began hunting down a series of individuals that would lead him to the power that he needed to put a stop to the madness. Following the 9/11 attacks, the CIA's demand for more precise intelligence was growing. An intricate terrorist network, Al-Qaeda, operated unseen in many Middle Eastern nations. Susskind's The 1% Doctrine tells us that the CIA would expand swiftly into an agency of covert and often deadly action. The game was kill or be killed. Finding individuals or small groups tucked into diverse cultures, some sympathetic to jihadists, some not, some incredulous. It was man-on-man war. This quote perfectly describes the road cut out for Batman in BVS. Suspecting that they may have an answer to his problems, Batman ferociously hunts down members of Lex Luthor's private militia. In 2016, The Dark Knight returns to the big screen for the first time since 2012, where we witness Ben Affleck's massive and fearsome Batman hanging from the ceiling after interrogating one of the militiamen about the identity of the White Portuguese. Batman hunts down several other men in the 18 months since the Black Zero event, further leaning into his desire to beat Superman in the ultimate man-on-man war. Batman's brutalization exacerbates in his search for kryptonite. In the face of this seemingly insurmountable threat, the responders of their respective attacks began to change their ways and traditional methods to adapt to new necessities. President Bush gave a speech at the United States Military Academy in June of 2002. Without being too specific, Bush outlined how the United States and her defense forces were changing their ways to fight the new enemy.
For much of the last century, America's defense relied on the Cold War doctrines of deterrence and containment. In some cases, those strategies still apply, but new threats also require new thinking. Deterrence, the promise of massive retaliation against nations, means nothing against shadowy terrorist networks with no nation or citizens to defend. Containment is not possible when unbalanced dictators with weapons of mass destruction. We cannot put our faith in the word of tyrants. If we wait for threats to fully materialize, we will have waited too long.
In other words, when your enemy is elusive, ubiquitous, and capable of mass destruction, like how a terrorist network is to America, and like how Superman is to the entire world, the response of the threat is to adopt a new set of rules that allows them to fight back. It is completely unaffordable for a threatened force to adhere to the traditional set of rules laid out for itself because of the potential lives that an avoidable second attack would cost in the time wasted following legal procedures. This is at least the justification in this temporary temptation of tyranny. Bruce later fired back at Alfred in the aforementioned conversation, defending his war and justifying his violence towards international terrorists and ultimately Superman, telling Alfred to...
Jesus, Alfred, count the dead. Thousands of people. What's next? Billions?
Batman knew that if he waited too long, that if he waited for Superman to attack, it would be too late. This particular train of thought also ran throughout the Oval Office and the American intelligence community following 9/11. On August 26th of 2002, Vice President Cheney spoke to the Veterans of Foreign Wars group in Nashville, Tennessee, where he declared that
what we must not do in the face of a mortal threat is to give in to wishful thinking or willful blindness.
He exclaims that what America is now facing
constitutes as grave a threat as can be imagined.
After witnessing the wiping out of a few city blocks in Metropolis, Batman is facing a greater threat than he ever thought possible, and knows that he must not take any chances. That would be wishful thinking. Batman and the Vice President knew that the risks of inaction are greater than the risks of action. Both entities needed to amass more power for the fight they were facing. As we know, except for the Superman, power cannot be innocent. Therefore, Batman and the American government must impose on the freedoms and livelihoods of the people to gain what they need. September 11th is the first foreign attack on the American mainland, and Black Zero represents that same phenomenon as the first alien attack in the film's modern world. Black Zero plays the same role. It is the first attack from beyond, so it gives the responders of their respective worlds the defensive justification to reach beyond their power and ignore their restriction to prevent a second attack, even without the guarantee of one, and no matter who it hurts. Batman initially tried to shrug off Alfred's warning that he was becoming more cruel because of his powerlessness by reminding Alfred that the crimes Batman commits in his crusade are nothing new. In fact, Bruce claims that
new rules.
We're criminals, Alfred. We've always been criminals. Nothing's changed.
even the Gotham residents can sense the Batman's sharpening tunnel vision as he cracks down harder on criminals in search of intel. Valentin described that the American response to 9/11 is a unilateralist policy, which often facilitates the exploitation of the most deprived social groups. The Gotham residents can sense a new kind of fear in criminals since the Black Zero event, as a result of Batman becoming more unilateralist and straying away from his own imposed restrictions. After watching Kahina Ziri cry for answers from the Superman on the news, Clark Kent decides to pay her a visit at her home in Gotham. Upon his arrival, he learns that
she's been gone.
This naturally raises concerns for Clark, but he takes the opportunity to inquire with the neighbors about the Batman. The husband ominously tells Clark that
the fact that she's smart and she got out of this city, and you need to get out of here before dark, unless you want to run into her.
The wife objects, shouting,
"Don't listen to that nonsense. Only people scared of him, people who got reason to be."
This scene brilliantly represents the American strategic system's response in the years following 2001 and how it impacted the public. We have one citizen that warns that the imposing authority is coming for us all, and if you don't watch your back, you'll be next. He has grown paranoid because the imposing and violent authority has reduced the standards of evidence down to mere suspicion alone. The 1% doctrine tells us that the statutory framework of democracies has stood firm on the rights of privacy. Essentially, that means that there is a prohibition against any of the government's eavesdropping on its own citizens. Much like Batman's aversion to killing his enemies, the CIA abandons its restrictions and commits a mortal sin in a time of crisis and war. After the CIA built the ultimate spyware with the help of First Data and Western Union, nearly 1 trillion communications collected annually are searched, allocated, and stored. This egregious imposition directly violated the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which guarantees you the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. This heinously unconstitutional act in the CIA's response to 9/11 is equated and mythologized with Batman's mortal sin in breaking his rule against killing his enemies. So although the husband is the fictional representation of the paranoid citizen, he is correct in assuming that freedoms and lives are being abridged by the fearfulness of those in power. Clark's encounter with the Gotham residents also perfectly enacts the opposition in America by having the wife disagree. She deems the husband's paranoia to be nonsense. She specifically states that
only people scared of him, people who got reason to be.
This clearly indicates that some citizens believe that the imposing authority, the government, is only using their power against the people that it needs to. In other words, using their power in a defensive manner. The split 50-50 of the husband and wife's views do not even precisely represent America, considering that the historic public affirmation of Bush's handling thus far of the war on terror would surely translate into equally historic gains in the 2002 midterm elections. Combining Susskind's writing with the public approval of America's response, with how Valentin informs us that the very rare cinematic allusions to the 11 September attacks are found sparingly throughout film, it is sensible to apply the real world's initial approval of the response to the war on terror to BVS's public approval of Batman's war against Superman. Batman, in his representation of the response, shares a mission with President Bush. One is trying to save the world from Superman, and the other is trying to save the world from terrorism. The perpetuated fear of the omnipresent looming threat positioned the response to it with an approval rating that hovered at an astonishing 90%. Unfortunately, in either situation, it did not matter what the public thought. If the Fourth Amendment needed to be violated to find a terrorist, it must be done. If Batman had to take a life to ensure the acquisition of kryptonite and the death of Superman, it must be done. As the opposing authorities' mindset grew more unilateral and absolute, so did their actions. The threat they faced did not allow for any delay caused by legal practices or hesitations when pulling the trigger. Batman is no stranger to discipline. It's discipline that makes you strong, and it's discipline that keeps you alive. So how much discipline is required not to overstep your power when you have so many opportunities at your disposal? Batman, like all Americans, have recourse to a formidable technological superiority to stay alive. Especially none other than Dick Cheney. After arming Predator drones, spiking the defense budget, and arranging an invasion of Iraq, the vice president prepared to do whatever was necessary to accomplish his goals. The second attack after 9/11 was intolerable and inexcusable. The vice president and others vital to the administration, like Donald Rumsfeld, found themselves unashamed and unfettered in the use of power, now that America finally stood alone as the world's only superpower. This type of aggressive self-reassurance of believed invulnerability allows them to execute coordinated attacks in the Middle East with little consideration for the legitimacy or justification of their incredible displays of power. On a cold, late November night in 2001, Vice President Cheney, Director of the CIA George Tenet, and others gathered in the Situation Room at the White House to discuss forming a battle plan in the war on terror. Cheney made it clear to everyone present, if there's a 1% chance that Pakistani scientists are helping Al-Qaeda build or develop a nuclear weapon, we have to treat it as a certainty in terms of our response. He continues, it's not about our analysis or finding a preponderance of evidence. It's about our response. With an absolutist declaration such as this, it is clear that the administration is thinking about all they possibly can do with no regards to what they should do. Cheney's doctrine lies at the very center of Batman's mindset towards Superman. After exclaiming to Alfred that there are millions of lives and the entire world at stake, so long as Superman has yet to bleed, so long as he lives, Bruce reveals his true response.
He has the power to wipe out the entire human race, and if we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty.
This administration-wide mentality gave way to the bypassing of the Fourth Amendment and the obscuration of what is considered evidence, and gave Batman justification for abandoning his rule. After Bruce makes his declaration, Alfred tries to talk some sense into him by stating that Superman is not our enemy. Bruce later learns the hard way that Alfred was right. Alfred knew, as Valentin explains, that real threat does not come from the outside. It is constructed by the highest levels of power who are tempted by tyranny. The Americans and Gothamites alike felt the effect of this when they no longer have freedom of privacy or are too scared to go out at night. Alfred knew that Batman, and by extension America, was headed down a dark path. Their newfound sense of absolutism endangers the state of an ethically controlled military and the implementation of strategic violence. These two concepts must be abided by so that America's ethical and ideological foundations are not put in danger. Unfortunately, America and Batman's founding principles are endangered when threatened by an insurmountable enemy, forcing them to take actions that they would not normally take. Those burdened with the task of responding to an elusive, ubiquitous, and destructive threat know that they cannot take any chances with potentially millions of lives on the line. Facing a severe lack of intel, George Tenet's CIA operated on a strict and unrelenting mindset of find them, stop them. They had a minuscule understanding of how Al-Qaeda operated, but knew they were executing an elaborative international network. First Data and Western Union stepping up to the plate played a pivotal role in helping the CIA and US government track phone calls, emails, and most importantly, financial records. The new surveillance machine could track the financial movements of known terrorists worldwide and follow the money back to the top of the organization. Able to track and freeze accounts, the plan was to starve the terrorist organization. Whether that meant making them unable to buy food or depleting their organization of growth and resources, it did not matter. The Vice President repeatedly made it clear that no matter the cost, the CIA must act on even the slightest suspicion. The actionable aspect of Cheney's 1% doctrine propelled the CIA to test their limits. Cheney made it clear that it was not about analysis, it was about our reaction. This is especially the case when it comes to prisoners of this ill-defined war on terror. The CIA, under immense pressure from the Vice President's absolutism, knew that the speed in which they had to operate to prevent a second attack would be drastically delayed by the droves of judiciary processes that they would normally have to comply with. Everyone in the CIA agreed that it was necessary to hold prisoners as long as possible, under the guise that they are too valuable as sources of intelligence, and maybe even too dangerous to release. The capturing of prisoners and disregard for due process began shortly after 9/11, but by 2003 it became common procedure. In a meeting with the Saudi Arabian Prince Nayef bin Sultan and CIA agent Rolf Mowat Larsen, there was a request that the prince arrest some highly sought after suspected terrorists. The prince agreed as a favor, but demanded that if you have any evidence against them, you better show it. So if you're keeping count, the CIA has now broken the 4th, 1st, and 5th Amendment. The collaboration between the CIA, First Data, and Western Union that ignored the FISA court led to the biggest search and seizure operation in US history. With the help of the Patriot Act, the CIA bypassed the 4th Amendment to spy on phone calls, emails, and financial records of the American people. Considering that they are committing unreasonable searches and seizures on a mass scale, then people would also have to watch what they say without being suspected of terrorism, or at least heavily monitored. Therefore, if you cannot speak freely without being called a terrorist or whatever, then the First Amendment has been abridged as well. The Fifth Amendment clearly states that no matter what, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Holding prisoners without evidence is a direct violation of this. By defying the majority of the 5 most sacred values of America, the CIA, government, and everyone else involved has committed the mortal sin of tyranny. In a time of great fear, the responders broke their most sacred values by becoming judge, jury, and executioner. Squirming in the trammel of the Superman, the fate of the Batman renders the same result as the real-life responders. Batman's sacred values are not listed on some immutable constitution, but they are ubiquitous throughout the comics and his mythos. The terror of watching his parents gunned down before him as a child created the mortal sins for the Batman of killing his enemies and creating orphans. However, Susskind states that there was no precedent to what had been done to America and what the country now faced. The same can be said for Batman following the Black Zero event. Facing an unbeatable power, Batman has to expand his limits to do what may be necessary in a crisis such as the potential end of the world. Without kryptonite, Batman was useless against Superman. At all costs, it had to be acquired. Batman then adopts a mindset similar to Cheney's CIA protocols. Loss of the kryptonite is unaffordable. Batman had to find it to stop him. The interrogation of captured enemies and the use of formidable spyware gave Batman the intelligence he needed to know when the boat, named the White Portuguese, would be delivering the kryptonite to Gotham Harbor. An intense car chase explodes in the streets of Gotham as the international mercenaries transport the mineral and are hunted down by the fearsome Batmobile. During the chase, Batman causes the death of a few mercenaries, but it did not matter. The kryptonite had to be intercepted, no matter the cost. Batman is trying to win this man-on-man war, so in the grand plan of killing Superman, taking the life of a mercenary is worthless while millions of lives are at stake. The destructive potential of the enemy is too great to worry about your own violence. The perceived threat of the Superman caused Batman to act erratically and become judge, jury, and executioner himself. The original mercenary that Batman interrogated knew nothing. He was too low level. Yet, he was still branded with the hot iron bat and sent off to prison. The branding sentenced him to a transfer to a metropolis prison, where Lex Luthor would pay to have him killed. Batman's brand of justice was becoming too imposing, that while straying from the code that binds him, he began to trample on the rights of citizens and commit his mortal sins. Albeit unknowingly, Batman branding the mercenary sentenced him to death in prison before any sign of a trial. Clark Kent sees the damage this does to the people of Gotham when he speaks to Mrs. Santos outside of the GCPD. She makes it clear that the murdered prisoner was not her husband, but was the father of her child. In the great effort to combat Superman's ability to kill and create orphans on a cataclysmic scale, Batman has now also killed and created orphans. His ignorance and terror in the face of an elusive, ubiquitous, and destructive threat caused Batman to inflict the general horror of tyranny, or at least his version of it. The seemingly insurmountable threat caused the responders to commit the same crimes and unconstitutional acts, abridging the freedom of those they were trying to protect, with the CIA being given the green light by Cheney to do whatever is necessary, and Lex informing us that Batman is the only person who stands a chance against Superman. Then they both, the CIA and Batman, possess the monopoly of legitimate violence, meaning they are the only ones capable of inflicting necessary violence. While possessing the means to execute such violence, Valentin tells us that in such a situation, those who possess the monopoly are capable of anticipating all violence other than its own. In Batman's mission to save the world, he calculated every aspect of a fight with Superman, yet never realized the damage he'd done to his legacy or the people of Gotham. However, any line he may cross is justified by the potential threat of Superman bringing about the end of the world. Bruce, enraged, exclaims to Alfred in the referential scene of the 1% Doctrine that
he has the power to wipe out the entire human race, and if we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty. And we have to destroy him.
With a grave as threat as this, it only further drives Batman away from his founding principles because of the necessity of eliminating the threat. The more Batman lets his mind go through constant justification of his first murder, the further he falls into the soldier's brutalization, coming to terms with the fragility of his life and that of his enemy. All this furthers the loosening grip on his soul. After a long, gruesome 20-year career as the Batman, which is told to us subtly and eloquently through backstory, he now stands face to face with the most powerful man in the world. In the titular fight, we see through visuals, key details, and brilliant filmmaking that Batman has prepared the abandoned warehouse as a trap for Superman. Valentin's chapter on September 11th tells us that the experience of fear, as well as a feeling of vulnerability, transforms the urban landscape into a trap. This fight signifies the first time that either character experiences true vulnerability. Batman's 20-year career has never presented him with an enemy capable of defeating him until now, especially not one nearly as powerful. Superman first experiences true fear and vulnerability after inhaling a cloud of kryptonite gas. Batman even explains to him that that's what he's feeling.
That's fear.
And therefore, vulnerability. The urban landscape continues to develop as a trap as sonic waves and machine guns fire at Superman. As the titular fight commences, Batman has completely let go of his morals at this point. He's here to kill. Valentin explains to us that ethically controlled and strategic violence must be implemented so that ethical and ideological foundations are not put in danger. Now that Batman has completely suspended the grip on the reins of his morals, he endangers his ideological foundations. Valentin further explains that the soldier is supposed to fight for his ideal by respecting ethical and spiritual values. If he abandons them because of war, like the brute, he runs the risk of losing his soul and also his life. As Batman raises the kryptonite spear over his head, ready to pierce Superman's heart, he hears the pleas of his victim to save his mother's life. Suddenly, flashbacks of his ideological foundations begin to swarm his mind. He realizes that he has made a grave mistake. Most of all, Batman realizes that he is not our enemy. Hearing Superman beg for the life of another while Batman placed his boot firmly on his neck gave Batman the revelation that the beaten enemy was only a political illusion used to construct an artificial threat. Batman is horrified upon this realization and throws the spear in a fit of rage. All of his preparation, all the crimes he committed, it had all been done in vain. Superman was not the enemy here, and in fact, they are more alike than they are different. Batman had led this crusade against Superman unjustly. Susskind tells us that for a president, the most serious charge that history might level at him is taking the country to war under false pretenses, such as claiming Iraq has weapons of mass destruction when they do not. As a representation of those responsible for responding to 9/11, Batman performs their actions by leading a false war against Superman and committing the mortal sins of his ideological foundations.
Only Gotham has maintained order, thanks to the vigilante gang being led by the Batman, adding to the massive credibility nightmare.
It's time you learn what it means to be a man.
The man's a danger to every citizen of Gotham.
If Superman was not involved, if he's got nothing to hide, then why hasn't he been seen?
The bat is dead. Bury it. Consider this mercy.
We are criminals, Clark. We always have been. You're still one too. Only difference is you have a boss.
He answers to no one. Not even, I think, to God.
I wanted to remind you to stay out of my way. In all the years to come, in your most private moments, I want you to remember the one man who beat you.
This is extremely dangerous
to our democracy.
Sometimes the age-old adages prove why they have been around for so long. The more things change, the more they stay the same. There is an aspect of these stories that remains constant. Corporate media serves its natural villain role as the enemy of the people in both of these monumental DC stories. In Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, with the only exception of the nationwide emergency broadcast, the fictional media goes uninterrupted, stirring up panic surrounding the re-emergence of the Batman. Every broadcast featured conflicting points of view on the same subject, designed to overload the public consciousness with options as how to think. The news media in this story consistently features anti-Batman advocate Dr. Bartholomew Wolpert, which builds a false sense of credibility by hearing from him more than any alternative point of view. He is constantly lecturing about how Batman is inspiring violent and revolutionary sentiments among the youth and is a menace to society. Meanwhile, the national discussion about the US government and Superman's involvement in nuclear war is non-existent. 30 years later, nothing about these tactics have changed. A contributing factor to the brilliance of BVS is the use of real-life media figures and the paranoid persecution that they subject people to. Jon Stewart, Vikram Gandhi, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Nancy Grace, and others play themselves as newscasters to further test the fictional world on reality. However, the media's outrage in Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition is directed at Superman. They question every move he makes, project their own corrupted values onto him, and fuels the debate as to whether or not Superman acts in America's interest. Public opinion is malleable in the hands of media. In both of these monumental DC epics, the media blames the crime of inflicting the general horror of tyranny on the public, on the man who is not actually committing it. In Miller's story, the media hardly mentions Superman as he manipulates the outcomes of global conflicts, but repeatedly speaks on the Batman as he protects Gotham citizens by single-handedly fighting a gang war. In Snyder's story, the media perpetuates constant hysteria about Superman as he saves children from fires, yet refuses to mention Batman's oppressive rampage. In fact, Clark Kent is the only person in the entire national media conglomerate that wants to report on the crimes of the Batman. However, in a time where men fall from the sky, crime in Gotham is not shocking news. It is unknown exactly why the media shifts the blame from the perpetrator, but this is how the outlaw is created. The constant hysteric dialogue of unconfirmed accusations and suspicions diverts all attention to the accused. The position of Batman and Superman in our world has shifted greatly over the last 30 years. However, the one thing that has remained constant in both of these DC stories is the media's tactics. In 30 more years, in 2046, will their tactics remain unchanged still? The brilliance of BVS is due to the implementation of a variety of aspects of the American consciousness, such as the Declaration of Noble Defense, our will to achieve, and the problem of tyranny by those in power. Around 1986, Superman served as a shining example of what we believed America's capacity for defense to be. Although he heroically stopped the nuclear warhead detonating in Corto Maltese, it displayed that Superman could single-handedly change the course of global conflicts, as could the American national security apparatus, when it wants to. Superman's representation of this mythologizes America's defense forces as the highest power, as the next best thing to God. Around 1986, the Batman's will to achieve peace is impregnable to the point where an old, war-torn body won't stop him. With peace as his highest priority in Gotham, the Dark Knight returned to cleaning the streets of crime. Around 1986, America lived in a state of panic at the fragility and uncertainty of the international conflicts that blanketed the country like snow. Batman inflicting pain and oppression on our own people was intolerable in a time where America needed to unite against a foreign threat. That's what made him an outlaw. After 2001, and specifically after the attacks on September 11th, everything changed. Hollywood no longer relied on the military for their dramatic material. They were unable to placate the realities of war in a believable manner because Americans first saw what power is really capable of on their own soil. Approaching 2016, the Superman became the outlaw. After witnessing his true capacity for destruction through Zod's actions, the people could never fully trust that Superman would not do something like that himself. He simultaneously represents a threat to America and the power America itself possesses. Both of their potential for tyranny and destruction makes them feared by the public. Superman mythologizes this phenomenon by showing us the path that we should take with our own power. He shows us how to use our own power in a noble and defensive manner to save us from our doomsday. Approaching 2016, the treason the CIA and the US government committed continued to impact the American people. Having broken the 4th, 1st, and 5th Amendment, they committed the mortal sin of American political culture. Batman mythologizes their response to 9/11 through committing his mortal sin in the same state of powerlessness and in the same man-on-man war. Brutalization causes him to kill some enemies that stand in the way of him killing Superman and saving the world. There was too much at stake to stick by your own restrictions that will ultimately slow you down. If there was a 1% chance that something so catastrophic could happen again, any action towards prevention had to be taken, or so goes the doctrine. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for his real-life counterpart, but Batman goes down this dark path so that he may show us how to come back from it. Given the opportunity to metaphorically save his mother, he still cannot afford to honor any of his imposed restrictions if absolutely necessary, so that
Martha won't die tonight.
It is not until Batman learns to humble himself in the face of an omnibenevolent power does he make a promise on Superman's grave to return to the hero of noble defense that he once was. Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns offers an excellent juxtaposition to the modern epic of the world's finest. Grant Morrison's recognition of the role reversal shed a brilliant light on how contrasting these similar stories are. Jean-Michel Valentin's Hollywood, the Pentagon, and Washington showed how prevalent the traditions of American national security still are in films today. His work will be supplemental to a variety of essays going forward. Ron Suskin's The 1% Doctrine has often made its rounds in comic book movie discourse because of its influence on the film's Batman. The connections run further than what can be fit into a single essay. The brilliance of BVS is multifaceted, shown by the coalescence of these sources and how they display the film's thorough mythologization of modern America and the state of its national defense. However, the film's ultimate message, when viewed with this lens, is to not let ourselves abandon our founding principles when threatened and powerless. We cannot allow ourselves to no longer show restraint over our own strength. You will be tempted, but it takes a Superman to not succumb to mortal sin.